A mad dog's coming-of-age ceremony was held in which I was raised by a duke who was so powerful that even a bird fell. The ducal family, including me, stood side by side behind the podium. Congratulations on the coming-of-age ceremony of Penelope Eckhart, the Eckharts the only woman. As an honorable nobleman and one loyal people of the great empire, so as to make its castle and name known to the world throughout its life. On behalf of the emperor, who was unable to come in person due to illness, a servant under his command issued an edict. The boring speech was repeated. The next order was the congratulatory remarks of the original family. The beginning was only a minor aesthetic to escape from the trapped pupa, but now in adulthood, she is a member of the proud Eckhart house. He said it long and elegant, but now that I'm an adult, he was telling me not to run like I used to. I could see Reynolds pointed to the old man and said, I think the nagging is about to start. The speech of the elder, which seemed to be highly self-possessed, went on as delicate and long as it seemed to be never-ending. Therefore I admit that Penelope Eckhart has grown up, and I formally declare it. At the end the elder grandfather finished speaking and neatly closed the right-hand file he was holding. There was a thunderous applause from the audience. I was supposed to hear it silently, without smiling or answering at any other questions. That's all I could do while I was holding this kind of coming-of-age ceremony. Butler, as the applause calmed down little by little, the Duke looked at the butler, who was in charge of the ceremony. The butler moved at once. He dragged the tray that he had prepared on one side. It was the final procedure. Drinking sherry as a way of congratulation and reverence between immediate family members. Of course this does not end completely, and it has since led to a reception. Anyway, I put my mind down because I was just about to finish it safely. But where the hell is Derek? At that time, the Duke asked Reynolds with an angry voice. I realized only then that Derek wasn't in his seat during the ceremony. Reynolds frowned as he looked around the hall. Oh, I've been looking for him for a long time before, but I can't find him. Should I bring him now, father? You go right away to him. But before the Duke allowed it, the butler arrived. The Duke quickly shut his mouth and again put a friendly expression on his face. On the tray brought by the butler, there were 4 bottles of liquor and 4 golden glasses side by side. Butler, go ahead, find Derek and get him here. The Duke ordered the butler, who handed the glass over him. He soon asked the guests for their understanding. Please wait a moment, the ceremony stopped. I had a new impression because I didn't know that Derek, who was so thorough, would cause problems. But that too, for a moment, I took a close look at the maid putting a bottle of liquor and a glass on the table instead of the butler. There was a rather crude gold cup in front of me. It was a monotonous thing with no name written on it, unlike the Duke's and the fancy glass of his 2 sons, in which the crest of the family and the beautiful handwriting were engraved. The golden cup used on special days, such as the coming-of-age ceremony, is not a new one but a long-time favorite. This meant that he expressed his affection for the main character of the day. So the nobles here gave and received gold cups with their names engraved instead of gold rings when their children were born. I just heard from Emily that Penelope also had a cup. When she had just followed the Duke to the Duke's house, Derek's coming-of-age ceremony was just around the corner. For that reason I could not engrave my name, unfortunately, while preparing for a rush. Since then there had been enough time to engrave name, but there had been a long gap of 4 years until the coming-of-age ceremony of Reynolds. The Holy Grail, which was forgotten even by its owner, was still playing. As I stared blankly at the golden cups, the agitation of the nobility grew bigger and bigger as it stopped. The butler who went looking for Derek still hadn't come back. Penelope, it was decided that there could be no further delay, and the Duke had no choice but to take the bottle. I'm going to lift the glass. I raised my share of the glass without a reply. The ceremony, which had been suspended for a while, was held again. Squeeze a bloody red liquid poured into the golden cup. Then the Duke handed me the cup and whispered, "If it's too strong, just pretend to drink and throw it on the floor." It was good to hear. I did not really want to drink. I tilted the bottle to his glass with a slight turn of my head. Soon the glasses bumped into each other. For Penelope, the Duke, who had made a short toast, poured the wine into his mouth. Again a steady stream of applause burst out. I pretended to drink as the Duke told me and threw away the wine on the lawn. When I'd put my glass on the platform again, Reynolds poured the wine naturally. For Penelope, the previous acts with the Duke were repeated once again. Throwing away wine was easier and more natural than before. When sharing the toast with Reynolds was finished, the Duke opened his mouth quietly. Sadly, the young Duke have something to do. I'm sorry for being late. It was then stopped the Duke's words. Someone stepped into a solemn still place. Everyone's eyes glanced there. The first thing that caught my eye was an old butler with a puzzled look. Approaching him, the tall man reached to the podium. As usual, a cold, cool face faced me. I looked at him with a little surprised eyes and hesitated. The gauge bar above the top of Derek's head, the gauge bar had changed color. From orange to bright yellow. My eyes were wide open. Derek's favorability was distracted by the change of color in the gauge bar, and I didn't notice it. A small figure standing behind him. Who's that lady? Is she the hidden lover of young Duke? What the hell? The whisper began to spread all over the quiet hall. It was the Duke, not the me, who recognized it first. Derek, you? The Duke couldn't speak, staring at the slender wrist he was holding. When Derek saw his father in astonishment, he said calmly, "It's a place where all immediate family members should attend. I was late picking up Yvonne." Father, a small shivered figure slowly emerged from behind his back. It was Yvonne, carefully raising her head. She looked at me, shivering her shoulders, and lowered her head down in fear. It looked as if she was forced to be hidden under the evil influence of a fake princess, but was dragged out of the hands of wicked woman. Father, the crowd, well, then that lady, don't tell me the crowd. A little murmur quickly spread to a loud noise. I watched the coming-of-age ceremony, which had become a mess, with dull eyes. Derek Eckhart, what the hell are you doing? A roar of anger broke out from the mouth of the Duke, who was trembling all over his body. No matter how much I think about it, I can't understand it, Father. Derek was talking like he had no doubt that he was doing the right thing. Why do you delay announcing that Yvonne had come back at Penelope's coming-of-age ceremony, and even hide her presence? You, how dare you? Let's announce about it at this event, where most of the guests of the Empire, as well as the family members, are gathered. His gaze, which had been fixed on the Duke, at that moment shifted to me. The Lady Eckhart, who had been lost since her childhood, has come back again. At that moment, I faced his blue eyes. It wasn't as surprising as I thought. Maybe it's because I made this assumption that this might happen when I heard that they were holding refreshments in the morning. At that moment, the eyes of the man, who was looking at me with no expression, twitched. Is it because I am not so overcome with emotion? Derek's jaw stood out. I glanced over him and looked around the mess at coming-of-age ceremony. What's going to happen now? The silent hall was noisy like the Dodgy market. Yvonne was taking advantage of the fuss, and completely stood out of Derek's back and looked at the Duke with a glare. It was then system. The hard mode limit period is over. System counting favorability. System favorability's count is complete. The light flashed before my eyes and... System, you didn't succeed in ending with any target until the time limit. A system window pops up to inform me that the game had failed. It was okay because I was prepared so far. But that was not the end. System penalty due to failure penalty? The unexpected development made my mind blank. What kind of penalty is this? Before I could even accept the situation, the writing in the system window changed rapidly. System downs the favorability of all capture targets. Penalty application. Eclise -20%, Derek -20%, Reynolds -10%, Vinter -10%, Callisto -10%. In the blink of an eye, everything fell apart. The white writing with came to me like a vision from all sides. I quickly lost the favorability I had accumulated with tears of blood. System exit hard mode. Ha ha ha, my eyes were clouded with the red haze. I laughed hysterically among the crumbling sand castles. Hey you, suddenly I laughed like a madman, and Reynolds called out to me with a strange face. My grotesque laughter gradually died down. The Duke, who was angry because he knew I behaved in the strange way, and Derek, who was at state of odds, looked back with astonishment. Everything was as expected. Hard mode ended with nothing but misery, and I was still in the game. In this fucking game, this crazy game. The hand holding the glass trembled. It's okay, but it is too early to be frustrated. I still have one method left that I have not used yet. But I can't just sit back and do nothing. If this was the case, wouldn't I be a fake lady who persecuted the real lady? Of course I did not care if I left this fucking place, but then after all, I ended up as a villain in the original story. I have been looking forward to them. Didn't they feel sorry for me who has been begging for my lives with a servile bow in front of them? I bit my lips and opened my mouth. What my first brother said was right. I raised my chin to the fullest and looked around the audience. Always arrogant like a proud Penelope. Then I fixed my eyes on the slender woman with the shaking eyes. Yvonne, I walked to her without hesitation. Penelope, the Duke came to his senses late and called me in a hurry, but it was too late. I turned to the podium and approached Yvonne. I didn't mind Derek's eyes like an awl and his gentle touch her hand. Thank God my one and only sister came home, ladies and gentlemen. Yvonne looked at me with wide open eyes. Not only her but all the male leads and noble people. But I laughed with all my might. My father tried to announce Yvonne's return, but I asked him to make it public at the reception, fearing there would be confusion among the guests. You said I tried to hide my sister. I guess there was a misunderstanding in your communication with your first brother. Isn't that right, Father? I looked back at the Duke and asked for his consent. You came to my room this morning and talked about it. A lie poured out of my mouth smoothly. The Duke flinched at my words. He kept moving his lips as if to talk to me, but he finally shut his mouth. We had no choice but to stop the scandal that broke out right away. A chilling silence descended upon the hall. I pulled Yvonne without looking at Derek with a stiff face. Come here, Yvonne. I felt an eerie chill where our skin touched, but I did not express myself. I took her around the podium and returned to my seat. I put Yvonne, who felt embarrassed, near me and pushed the gold cup in front of me. Will you pour me the wine? We're family now. Penelope, the Duke warned in a stern voice, but I pretended to be a child with an exaggerated sullen look. Father, it's my birthday. The Duke's mouth shut. I grinned at the silent remark. He eventually reached out for the butler. He asked to bring an extra glass. In the midst of this he seemed to be amazing, calmly and cool-headed. The atmosphere was so subtle that it was beyond control, but the process of the coming-of-age ceremony was enforced under my will. A while later, at the butler's instruction, a maid came running with a golden cup. Coincidentally, she was Yvonne's temporary maid. A similar cup was placed next to Penelope's golden cup. I immediately picked up the bottle and handed it over to Yvonne. You'll follow me, right? It was then the eyes of Yvonne, who was shaking helplessly, filled with joy. Yes, then she was dragged to me and looked at me with dead look, and it looked like as if she was treated like a nothing. I stuck out one of the plain cups on the table. Thank you, Penelope. And I am sorry because I ruined your coming-of-age ceremony. She whispered cautiously, pouring the wine into my glass. Don't say that, what a mess. I grinned and accepted the wine she had poured. On the contrary, I imitated a benevolent sister, pouring the wine into her glass. You don't have to be sorry anyway. It was the moment I suddenly felt a slight tremor in my chest. Not to mention the shiver, but I even stopped tilting the bottle and lowered my gaze. An ancient magic necklace that could not be removed at the recommendation of the Crown Prince. The color of the white bead stuck in the middle of it had changed. It turned yellowish. I managed to lift my gaze, which frozen stiffly, and looked at Yvonne. Whether she hadn't noticed it yet because of the bright sunlight, she spoke to me, who suddenly stopped talking with a curious look. But why is she asking me the way to the office street? At that moment Emily's voice pierced my ear mercilessly. I thought of a bottle of purple liquid that I left in my desk drawer in my room. One remaining method that I have not used. It was to escape from death. With hard mode just around the corner, that was all I could choose to get out of here. Even if I take the risk of real death. I requested Vinter a poison that can kill as quietly as I fell asleep. And originally I was going to do it during the coming-of-age ceremony. It was a little annoying let them watch me fall and die, making them doubt the angelic hostess. But I changed my plans just before the coming-of-age ceremony. Emily's statement had also a sense, and my conversation with the Duke also was great. Penelope, whom he said he wanted to give her the best of all, and Penelope, who disappeared without being able to hold the only one-time ceremony in his life. Thinking about it, I couldn't possibly ruin the coming-of-age ceremony. Poison was always available. Anyway, I wanted to see how hard mode ended, so I gave up the plan and locked the desk drawer. Apparently right after the coming-of-age ceremony, I tried to drink it alone without anyone knowing. Penelope Yvonne called me carefully as she sees me being weird, standing motionless for quite a long time. I moved my wrist, which had been stopping for a while, and poured the wine. The light emitted from below became stronger. That the necklace at last. Yvonne also noticed that the bead had turned indisputably yellow. She stared with a startled look at the necklace. Pouring sound, I filled the glass with red wine and put the bottle down on the table and said, "Yvonne." She stared at me with surprise, taking her eyes off my necklace. My heart that was beating wildly calmed down. "The glass has changed." "That's my glass?" "You must have been confused because there were no patterns." I pointed to the golden cup full of wine that she was holding. It was a lie. Yvonne's temporary maid put the glass she had brought right in front of her, so there was no confusion. "She did, I'm sorry." I snatched the cup from the crying girl with a look of embarrassment. The wind overflowed the back of my hand with the liquid of wine. The dripping liquid was like blood flowing out of my wrist. "Penelope, you'll get drunk. Hold up your glass," I said briefly before the flustered heroine came to her senses and interrupted. And without caring whether she really lifted her glass or not, I turned my body. "Attention, everyone! Today's main character is Yvonne, not me," I told the audience, lifting up the glass of Yvonne that I had taken away. Once again the roaring of voices took over the hall. I smiled brightly and said, "Congratulations, everyone. The real lady has returned." Penelope, I could feel the gaze of Reynold, full of surprise and of astonished low voice of the Duke. It didn't matter if it was a game scenario or a trap for Yvonne. If I died and escaped from this place, it would be over. This is the end of it. I didn't plan it, but when it came to this I felt relieved. This is how it should end up. I don't know what I was so afraid of. Last time I finally looked at the faces of the male leads. Derek, who crossed his arms over his chest and was staring at my actions expressionlessly. The Crown Prince is frowning, as it seems strange to see the sudden turn of events. And Vinter with a face full of anxiety. It was a little strange that the gauge bar still remained on top of their heads, but I did not care anymore. Now it was the end of the day to see those sickening faces. For the heroine. After a low murmur, I gulped down the glass I was holding in front of my eyes. The moment I swallowed all the liquid in there and put the glass down. "Young lady," suddenly Vinter rose violently from his seat. His face was horribly distorted. Now it seemed that he had noticed the color of the necklace. The guests looked back with astonishment at Marquis of Verdandi, who suddenly rose from his seat. I stared at him with no expression on my face. Suddenly, I felt a warm sensation in my heart. Gradually, the heart rate increased. I staggered with my head and felt a twinge of dizziness. The Crown Prince, whose eyes were wriggling as if he had sensed something unusual, seemed to be shouting, "We need to call a doctor right now." Around the time when a loud noise burst from Vinter that was constantly looking at me with anxious eyes. My heart was burning hot. I was blinded by the tremendous pain. I coughed a small vomit, feeling 1,000 shots boiling under my neck. I thought my eyes were suddenly seeing things. But they weren't. Blood really came out of my mouth. "Penelope!" People's screams rang from far and wide in my ears. The hall quickly became a mess. But I couldn't feel it as my body was slowly falling apart. By the time I held the edge of the table and supported my crumbling upper body, suddenly my eyes were blanked out with white flashes. System main quest: the missing children's whereabouts. Third, save the kidnapped children from the force of evil. Quest: other rewards are activated. What the hell? Through my blurred vision, I could see a white square system window. System, don't you feel sorry to end a difficult quest like this is a long time ago? As a special reward, you will be given a chance to see the hidden ending as high praise for playing hard mode enthusiastically. 1 billion gold - 500 million gold, pay or reject. Hidden ending? I felt like I was waking up in the middle of everything getting dim and hazy. I struggled to get up my body that kept falling apart. However, my eyes were blurry, and my arms were bent. Meanwhile, the writing inside the system window changed. System, you have enough funds, so it will be automatically paid in 5 seconds. System 5. System 4. What the fuck? No, no! I shook my head wildly and stretched out my hand to press reject. Cough, but at that moment, blood spurted out of my mouth and my body shaked. Penelope Eckhart. Then someone hugged me roughly. The finger that was almost touching reject was stopped. Call the doctor, call the doctor. Right now! Someone who hugged me shouted. System 3. System 2. Either way, I shook my head desperately, blinded by the system window. No, 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 reject it. No, I have to press reject, so get out of here. The numbers changed rapidly. I struggled desperately to press reject. However, my body shook violently again, and my eyes blurred. There was screaming, howling, and chaos all over the place. No, get out of my way, no fuck. I couldn't finally press reject because of the countless number of people who came upon me in an instant. System paid 500 million gold to enter the hidden route. The remaining funds 999,999,999 plus. The last thing that was reflected in my hazy eyes was neither the Duke nor the male leads. The system window that finally floated after the countdown was completed. It felt like a demon came out of hell. I heard a sound as if something had fallen. Please stop killing me, I closed my eyes and screamed silently. Despite the sudden appearance of the real daughter, she remained calm. The act of avoiding a chaotic atmosphere and pushing forward with the ceremony calmly was more graceful and dignified than any other noble. This didn't fit her with the nickname Eckhart's crazy dog at all. For the heroine, as she said it in the low voice as if it was a magic spell, the time of all those in the hall stopped at that moment. In the meantime, the woman who raised her glass to herself and drank the wine at a gulp. Cough, then she collapsed, throwing up blood. The dark pink hair close to red slowly faded like a falling flower. So Derek could not immediately tell what was wrong. Not only that, but Yvonne Reynolds and the Duke, who were standing right next to her, stood frozen, unaware of the situation. The crumbling woman's body managed to hold onto the table. But once again the small body fluttered and threw up more blood. Watch out! With a shriek a step later, the ceremony became a mess in a moment. Derek moved his lips and stepped forward instinctively. It was then Penelope Eckhart. Someone pushed his body hard. As he staggered and lost his balance, Derek wondered at the brief moment when he saw the fluttering blonde hair. The Crown Prince, who was sitting in the back, was running as if he was tornado. As if he had moved in a flash, he arrived and embraced the body that was collapsing close to him. And at the same red liquid quickly moved at his white uniform. Only then did Derek realize that what Penelope had thrown up was blood. At the same time something huge began to weigh on his shoulders and he could not move his body. He just opened his eyes and looked at the dark red hair drooping from the Crown Prince's arms. Call the doctor quickly! With Penelope in his arms, the Crown Prince was in a quiver. The thunderous voice finally unraveled the numb atmosphere. One by one the frozen guests, filled with astonishment, began to move. Open your eyes, princess. Do not close it, no. Please, please. Not caring of the sticky blood on his hands, the Crown Prince stroked Penelope and whispered. There was a strange feeling of affection between the two of them, about whom there were various rumors. The Duke, who came to his senses late, approached them with a pale face. Your Highness? Fuck, when the hell will the doctor comes? Don't you see she is dying? But as soon as he spoke, the Crown Prince flared and bursted with anger. As if the Duke would take away the woman in his arms. I can save her life. Then, someone shouted urgently. The Marquis of Verdandi. It was none other than Winter who emerged from the crowd. He quickly approached the crown prince, who was holding the unconscious princess with a pale complexion. Your Highness the Crown Prince, please allow me to see her for a moment. What are you going to do? There is an antidote I usually bring in case of an emergency. The Marquis of Verdandi. Is someone trying to poison her in the duchy now? The Duke reacted sensitively. This is because it was a sensitive matter that could lead to political problems. It was premature to make a definite decision, with only circumstantial doubt. That's not something that I dare to answer. Winter glanced over the Crown Prince and the people surrounding Penelope. I just want to give her the first aid that we can do right away. That's what you believe in? The Crown Prince looked at him and opened his mouth heavily. Even if the princess took the poison, I don't know what you have and what you're going to do. It's an toxic antidote in a case of extreme situation. Winter answered calmly. It will be difficult to decipher it completely because I don't know exactly what kind of poison she took, but it will serve as a neutralization to some extent. The Crown Prince glared at him with his eyes wide open, hearing such a posthumous conclusion. It seemed to be a doubt of whether he could be trusted. The Duke shook his head with a somber look. His Highness is right. I'm not sure Penelope was poisoned, but we can just wait for the doctor. If you know it's poison, whatever it is, it's bad for her. Give her the antidote now. Until then, Reynold, who was frozen with a blank face, beckoned his father with red bloodshot eyes. But don't you trust the Marquis of Verdandi, father? It's called first aid. She's going to die before the doctor comes. The Duke, who identified the direction of the finger's tip, distorted his face and closed his mouth. Until just now, Penelope's body, which had been convulsed with blood, had become silent. Her eyes, which Callisto had begged to stay open, closed beautifully and had no movement. Her cold body looked like a corpse, with even no dying breath. The Crown Prince, who confirmed her state, ordered in a tight voice, "Feed her. Your Highness, but if anything goes wrong." Despite the Duke's shout of dissuasion, the Crown Prince continued. You'll have to be prepared, Marquis. When he was given permission, Winter calmly took of the bottle from his arms. In front of others he said calmly, but his fingertips trembled funnily when he covered her from other people's eyes. Just in case he brought the antidote, but he swore to God, he didn't know it would be used like this. I should have refused at the time, no matter what she said. A ray of remorse flashed through him. She said that if you refuse, you should pay the debt you owe. But when he heard the maid's words, he couldn't say no again. He was a sinner to her. A sin of recklessly suspecting and testing a person who has nothing to do with Layla. But you shouldn't have deceived people with a lie as if it was interest or curiosity. At the same time, his feelings were not even as good as her, but he was the sinner for his lie. Ever since he was told not to contact her until she finds him first, he had been constantly agonizing between the urge to contact her and the reason he should give up and endure. And when she finally sent the maid looking for him, and then he got the request from the maid. It's funny that what he felt then was relief and worry, rather than disappointment. He knew that it was a profane idea that was far from his beliefs that he kept firmly. Nevertheless, while making the poison without an antidote, he never thought she would drink it herself. He didn't think she would fall down because of the poison that he didn't even give her. But why? She knew clearly, she had poison in her gold cup. Because the color of the beads on the necklace has changed. She should have seen the color that was bright enough to recognize even for someone sitting far away. Then why did she drink it with such a grim expression? He felt sick to his stomach from the confusion. But this was not the time for complacency to think about these questions. He bit his lips and pulled out the bottle that touched it with his fingertips. He opened the cap of a small glass bottle containing violet liquid and leaned straight down. A bitter image came from the Crown Prince, who had given the order by his own mouth but was not willing to let the princess go. He said it desperately, suppressing it. Your Highness, please show the face of young lady. The Crown Prince glared at him with icy red eyes, and reluctantly showed the princess' face from his arms. The blood dropped out from her face. Winter, who closed his eyes for a moment in misery, soon opened her lips with a cautious touch and tilted the bottle to her mouth. 1 drop, 2 drops, 3 drops. A liquid resembling the poison given to her went into her mouth. There was the faint, lingering sound of breath. Fortunately, her breath returned to its original form shortly after. Her pale complexion, like a corpse, also began to turn red. "Duke, I've brought the doctor." Just in time, the butler called him, and the medical stuff with the stretcher arrived. After first aid by Vinter, Penelope was quickly moved into the mansion. A sigh of relief came from each of the mouths of those watching who had been holding their breath. Except for one person, Derek. He was one step away from the urgent situation, and only quietly watched all the way to the end. Slap. It was when his cheeks stinged and caught fire that he came to his senses. "What the hell are you doing?" When he opened his eyes, he saw his father's distorted face. At a time when the Emperor's representatives, as well as His Highness the Crown Prince, are all here, you dare to make things like that? The Duke couldn't control his anger and shouted. Derek, he had been very mature since he was a child. If he knew one thing, he would wake up his son from his dumb state, and he finished his own work without having to do it. Therefore, unlike Reynold, the Duke pointed out that he had never risen his hand at first son. A single bloodstain flowed through his mouth. Derek felt the tingling sensation in his mouth. To face such an angry father. He slowly returned his head back to its original state. And opened his mouth. It would not have happened if we had revealed it right away without hiding her in the first place. If only we hadn't put off the announcement that Yvonne had come back to fulfill Penelope's whims. "You son of a bitch is still out of your mind." The Duke raised his hand once more. However, the hand did not fall and trembled in the air. "It is my will to postpone the announcement, and hide Yvonne, not Penelope." The family, a little out of place, was now in a state of catastrophe that cannot be attached again. The Duke shouted with a voice full of despair. "Isn't it only a once-in-a-lifetime coming-of-age ceremony, a moment to be noticed more than anything else? I ordered it myself on order to stop to rumors about my soon-to-be-defeated stepdaughter from the frivolous bastards. And yet this morning, she told me to cancel the coming-of-age ceremony because Yvonne's back." The Duke, who spit it out randomly, shut his mouth out of a rough breath. Derek's blue eyes fluttered. However, due to the blindness of his eyes, the subtle changes were not visible to the Duke. His first son, who was reliable and proud of himself, lost his younger sister, and his number of words dropped sharply. But he had a time, so the Duke thought he had accepted Penelope as a family to some extent. It was an illusion. Derek wasn't accepting Penelope at all. He just valued his public position over his personal feelings and acted accordingly. The Duke regretted his past of neglecting his children under the pretext of being busy. And he rubbed his face with his hands and muttered like lamentation. "I didn't know that you hated Penelope so much. I did something terrible to all of you." Derek's expression changed subtly. His father's words didn't make any sense. "It is not because I hate her." He had never, ever thought he hated Penelope. It was just that. If rumors spread wrong, Eckhart's prestige would be harmed because we delayed the announcement that we had found your own daughter do the coming-of-age ceremony. This matter is not so childish. Let's stop talking about it. At that time the Duke raised one hand and stopped him. He flopped down on the chair, perhaps a little less excited, and said rather in cold voice, "Now it's not just the issue of the Penelope's coming-of-age ceremony, it's a poisoning case aimed at Lady Eckhart." Poisoning? Derek's blue eyes shook at that moment. The girl, who smiled brightly and brought the gold cup up, suddenly burst into blood and fell down. He didn't remember all the things that had happened a while ago. It was a small memory blackout at that time, as if his memory had been divided and cut up. Only the dark pink hair that collapses like a flower in his lost memory sometimes came to his mind. As if the Duke's words had been a hit in the face, the pulse suddenly began to throb frantically. "What's wrong with me?" His hands, which were clinging together behind his back, were sweating as he stood still. Derek tried to regain his coolness like his father. He retorted from an objective point of view. Immediately after drinking, she vomited with the blood and collapsed, so there was no doubt it was the poison. However, no one except the Marquis of Verdandi was convinced this is because Duke and Reynold, who drank the same wine, were fine. What's more, who dares to confront Eckhart committing such an inhumane act? Derek looked at the face of a serious Duke and licked his lips. So what's wrong with him? What did it happen with his mind? What kind of poison it was? He would like to ask him something that's going around the tip of his tongue. Are you sure she has been poisoned? However, the words that came out were completely different. The Duke answered such a son shortly rather than just looking at him. The doctor just confirmed it. At that moment Derek felt that his palms had become so wet that they were slippery. Who dared against Eckhart? He gripped his hands together even harder to hide them. And I put a maid named Becky in a dungeon and also put Yvonne under home arrest in her room. The Duke gave a short reply. Derek raised his head and asked back. Why is Yvonne? Because it was Yvonne's temporary maid that brought the cup, father. The maid in charge of Penelope testifies. Not long ago Yvonne's temporary maid secretly asked her how to get to the upper street. Derek was inwardly surprised at the words of the Duke. It was not clear whether the investigation had progressed that much. So he wanted to ask him what happened then and right after that. But Yvonne, it can't be Yvonne, father. But it was time to look back on what happened rather than to pay attention at such personal feelings. That was what the Duke of Eckhart's job was to do. Derek put the confused thoughts aside and pointed out the questionable issues at the Duke's words. I'm not defending Yvonne. I don't really have the right to do that, but what's the benefit of poisoning Penelope? I don't understand why the target has been Penelope. It should be my father or me, or maybe she got a poison from the maid or someone else. The Marquis of Ellen is the most suspected one. I've been receiving reports about his quietness lately. But there's still a possibility that he has been doing it secretly in order to take revenge over the hunting competition. Derek, who had gibberish thoughts with a serious face, suddenly raised his head. I'll go underground right now and interrogate the maid myself. Longer hours will only give her time to get out of here. Derek, the Duke called Derek when he was about to leave the office right away. And he gave notice. Stay aside from this case. Derek stammered unbecomingly. Father, I maybe mishear you just now. I told you to stay still because I know you will. He didn't mishear it. The Duke gave orders to the young Duke in a clear voice. To stay out of this case. Derek, who understood him, asked his father again with clenched teeth. Did I become a suspected one because I brought Yvonne? It's not like that. If not, then what's the problem? He asked with a little unconvinced face. Not only we have to check the bottles and glasses, but we should also keep a close eye on everyone invited today. Don't you know that it's hard for Reynold and the butler to take over all that? I'm going to let Marquis of Verdandi to take part in this case. Derek laughed at word of the Duke. He is the head of another family. But what do you believe in leaving the family's innermost affairs to him? Besides, he is the most influential suspect. No one immediately knew that Penelope had poisoned on the spot, but only the Marquis. If it wasn't for Marquis of Verdandi, the Duke, who was listening to his son in silence, hit the desk with his fist. If it wasn't for the first aid of the Marquis, we would have been preparing for the funeral by now. Why did she vomit blood? Why did she collapse? You still don't even know if she's poisoned or something else. The angry Duke couldn't speak anymore and shut up. It was the same for himself, that he couldn't doubt that it was the poison. Far from being suspicious, he saw his falling daughter and did nothing but to stand frozen. The ceremony ended in the worst possible way. The Duke swept down the desk with his fist, which he struck hard at the corner of his bloodshot eyes. Deep tiredness sat down on his face, which was covered by his hands. It's not the poison that kills at once, but it's a rare poison that causes the bleeding to stop and makes the person suffer if you don't take the antidote in time. After all, the Marquis of Verdandi saved Penelope, who was slowly dying. It was then at the trembling voice that came from side. The Duke blinked his eyes and lifted his head. Derek stood there with an unfamiliar look on his face. A blue pupils that shook uncontrollably without focus, and his pale face. It was the first time the Duke saw his son in such state. It can't be true, Derek dear. The Duke looked at him with eyes of wonder, and called him, but like a man who can't hear the call, he stretched out his hands forward, which had been held back until then. He slowly lowered his head and looked at his sweaty hands. She wouldn't die. At that moment something that he had forgotten flashed through his mind. It was a scene of his dream last night. Yvonne, who was dying, vomiting with red blood in his arms. Derek, it was strange, the dream had changed. His memory was mixed up as if someone had cut part of his mind, but even if it wasn't for such an ominous, unlucky dream, shouldn't Yvonne take the poison? Penelope would have prepared a poison herself, but she's not the one who's going to die from the poison. He didn't feel his hands and his back was filled with cold sweat. Derek shook his head again and murmured incoherently. She can't die, she's poisoned herself, Derek. You. The Duke stared at Derek with astonished eyes and urged him in a subdued voice. You should go to your room and get some rest, but the interrogation, this is an order. Derek finally got his mouth shut. Okay. After a while he ended the short answer and left the Duke's office. He left the Duke's office long after a brief reply. There was a person who was waiting for him. Young Duke, it was a head maid. What's the matter? Well, can you go to see Lady Yvonne? She said with a face full of sweat. She's been shaking and crying ever since she has been locked in her room. Derek hesitated at the remark. It was him who dragged her to the coming-of-age ceremony. But how frightened and unfortunate it is to be trapped in a room after being half-day criminal. How scary and sad she must feel. Even my sister, I had to worry about her. Judging by this, he tried to move towards Yvonne's room. However, unlike his head, his body did not move. It was strange. Suddenly he thought something was wrong. The feeling of anxiety that he felt during a conversation with the Duke spread all over his body. Later, Derek, with a tightly voice, struggled to say a word. But she doesn't eat. She keeps looking for the young Duke of later. I'll go later. He walked away as if he were running away from the desperate maid's requests. He walked aimlessly without knowing where he was headed. Why do I feel this way? From the moment he heard that Penelope might die, he couldn't shake off the guilty feeling. All he did was take Yvonne, who was hardly breathing, and crying, "Come, brother." "No, young Duke. Do you have time?" Early in the morning Yvonne came over and asked for refreshments. She tried to pretend to be casual and laughed, but she was full of gloom. It made sense. No one cared about her because of preparation for Penelope's coming-of-age ceremony. Moreover, she was hiding in her room during the coming-of-age ceremony, but she couldn't find how to handle with herself, who was struggling. He was so embarrassed that he didn't know how to comfort her. "I'm fine. The coming-of-age ceremony has already been held." In just one word, "fine," she said with a smile as the fog faded away. "Soon. It's a shame that we couldn't spend this festival together rather than to attend the coming-of-age ceremony to celebrate the victory. The fireworks at this festival were much more colorful and beautiful than in other times. If I had regained my memory a little earlier, I could have seen it with my brothers." This time a shivering voice added to her senses was full of regret. It was enough to bring back vividly the memory of the day that Derek had forgotten. More than a decade ago, the day he lost Yvonne. The three siblings crawled out of the hole without the Duke's knowledge, who banned them from going to the festival streets at night, saying it was dangerous because his little sister wanted to see fireworks up close. The night street of the first festival they saw was very interesting. Around the time they bought cheap ornaments, ate street food, and danced to the music they heard, the parade procession struck them. Brother Yvonne, his little sister, was swept away by a flock of new people. An instant, the blue eyes that were taking away from him filled with tears. The little hand that was stretching toward him, he never caught it. Derek closed his eyes to the memory of being revived in an instant. Brother, when he opened his eyes again at the slightest sound, he saw thin little face looking at him with her worried eyes. At that moment Derek was sure the commoner brought in by a slave was that his lost sister, who he lost a long time ago. "I'm sorry, young Duke, I'm afraid I've caused you trouble by saying something I shouldn't have said. I just remembered that. But I really missed you even when I lost my memory." Always when she saw his distorted face, Yvonne hurriedly got up from her seat. Even after that incident, his sister was worried and comforted rather than resenting at him for missing her. Even when she came back to find her house, she was so discouraged that she couldn't even say brother, unlike the kid on the second floor. That's why just before the coming-of-age ceremony he brought her out, who was breathing heavily and crying in search of help. Unlike Penelope, who was about to have a more colorful coming-of-age ceremony than anyone else, it was a pity that Yvonne could not even have a proper coming-of-age ceremony because she lived among the common people. The ominous dream he had the previous day also played a part. No matter how much she was reticent, she won't be rude in front of everyone. "Let's go together, but young lady, you are also a lady. Isn't it more ridiculous for his daughter not to attend the meeting when all our immediate family members are attending?" As he took Yvonne, who was delighted by his words, to the hall, he suddenly wondered. How will she react to the Yvonne I brought? Will she be angry and did evil things? Or maybe she will shut her mouth as usual and make no expression, that lovely smile on her face, just like she did when she got his scarf, or she would say, "I'm all wrong." Derek stopped in amazement at the thought that came in his mind here. Suddenly he came up there. Looking around, he realized he was standing on the last floor of the central staircase. He could see the butler and a maid standing in the hallway with a nervous faces. He hesitated for a moment, and soon moved on. Young Duke the butler, who raised his head at his unexpected appearance, looked surprised as she inside Derek asked. The butler, who was briefly catching the subject of the vague question, soon replied with a slight nod. The doctor is checking her. I'd like to check her condition for a moment. That's the butler was visibly embarrassed to hear that he was going to enter into the room. A strange voice suddenly came from inside when he was wondering with a perplexed expression. Somehow her condition was it was the heavy voice of a man. Around the time Derek, who was surprised, grabbed the doorknob to open widely the door that had been slightly open. Young Duke, it is His Royal Highness. The butler hurried to stop him and murmured lowly. These words hardened Derek, who held the door knob in his hand. The new figures of two men were reflected at the haze of his eyes. The doctor and the crown prince stood near the bed in the middle. She is over far from her death, but the blood hasn't stopped completely yet. When will she regain her conscience? The doctor shook his head vaguely. At the end of his speech he had a bundle of agar filled with red water in his hand. As if all the strength had left his legs, the crown prince staggered and sat down on the chair beside her bed. He pulled her thin hand out from under the blanket and put it to his lips. There came a deathly dreary silence in the room. I've been mean to you all the time. Is that because I have teased you so you want to take revenge over me this time? After a while he heard a murmur of the crown prince. Derek held his breath and listened to the muffled voice. In fact, I know well that you are far from a wicked woman who has neither blood nor tears. As rumors say, I know you're a living being who is able to feel and suffer, but every time you say that you're so beautiful and charming that all I can see in my eyes is you alone. And I'm not able to take my eyes off you. That's why I keep doing that, but I didn't mean it. The crown prince, who had been confessing to her, buried his face deep in Penelope's hand. You put out yourself the rumor that you are an evil woman with no feelings or tears. But you aren't a person without blood or sorrow, rather a person who hates to fight. But your blood is still running. You hate this. Do you? A pale hand like a corpse seemed to have no warmth. The crown prince rubbed her lips and cheeks with his hands to deliver his temperature to her. You asked me to get you out of this hell, so please open your eyes. Don't die, Penelope. Don't leave me in this hell. The moment Derek heard the whisper, something broke down with a huge roar in Derek's ear. That's he didn't want this. It was just out of curiosity. What kind of reaction did he expect when he brought Yvonne? But he didn't want something like this. Without his knowing, Derek's face was distorted. It's from the maid's room. A small glass bottle with a clear liquid was placed on the table. As a result of walking through the streets and checking, it was an antidote to the poison that Penelope drank. Reynolds, who had raised to take out evidence, had returned to his seat. Currently there are 5 men sitting with the heavy faces in the drawing room. Duke, Derek, Reynolds, Callisto, and Winter. It was a meeting to find a clue to the incident. Derek was absent from the process of investigating the case as the Duke's orders, but he sat down as the young Duke to settle the case. What does the maid say? It was the Duke who broke the heavy sitting silence first. Reynolds replied. For a moment she said Penelope asked Yvonne to get it to feed her, so she ate the poison that princess saved to drink herself, as if she is an idiot? The crown prince struck back sharply. Reynolds frowned at his nervous voice. If it's true, she might have mistaken the glasses for being similar. At that time Marquis opened his mouth. The Duke is surprised at his words, raises his eyes and looks at him. Marquis, be careful with your words, as the maid claims. Winter looked up and looked at Reynolds, who was sitting opposite him. Then Reynolds nodded with a look of great discomfort. It's Lady Penelope who deliberately prepared a similar new glass and put poison in it, but Lady Penelope is not the culprit. The remarks Winter made just now changed his words that he had said a moment ago. Derek, who was silent until then, raised his head and reacted. How can you be sure of that, Lady Penelope? After that, Marquis of Verdandi stopped talking with a face full of hesitation, and soon sighed and poured out words. It's because she knew it was already poisoned before she drank wine. Everyone in the drawing room was froze. What? It was the crown prince who replied first. What are you talking about? It is exactly what you heard. Winter answered briefly. 3 pairs of blue eyes shook in consternation. The Duke stammered, saying, I can't believe what I heard. She drank it because she thought it was poison. What do you mean, Marquis? Why are you sure about that? Derek asked back sharply instead of Duke. Tell me quickly, Marquis. You have said she thought it was poison, and she drank it. The necklace that young lady was wearing. At the loud sound of the Duke, who was expressing his urge, Winter hesitated and threw up the truth. Before young lady lifted her cup with wine, the color of the bead in the middle of her necklace changed. What the necklace is an artifact with magic that reacts to toxicity when there was a toxic substance nearby. The color of the beads changed, and I saw that Lady Penelope's beads turned yellow when she lifted the cup. At the same time, the faces of the Duke and the Crown Prince, who had previously been briefed by Penelope about the necklace, was simultaneously turned pale. The Crown Prince spoke slowly in a subdued voice, then she saw it, and drank it. I'm not sure if young lady saw the color change of the necklace, but she has probably noticed it briefly. How? Because it was so clear, bright color that even I could see it from far away. The Crown Prince blew his breath and swept his bangs roughly away. The Duke also raised his hand and rubbed his dry face repeatedly, sitting with a blank look on his face as if he had lost all his spirit. Only Derek had an expressionless face as it was at first time. When he looked at him unconsciously he wondered, but then the Crown Prince opened his mouth. As Vinter turned his head he saw red eyes glared at him. How do you know so much about the artifact? It doesn't seem to be the kind of thing that the Empire uses. His eyes were dimmed, the Marquis' blue eyes shook shallowly. But it was a very momentary moment, to the point where illusion might be considered. It's a rare item in the Empire, Vinter replied, staring straight at the Crown Prince with an unwavering face. I've also had that artifact. In a country where it is commonly used, there is a custom of wearing various objects in fear of evil spirits. You really have everything, by the way, all sorts of things from antidote to a rare thing from a faraway country. That's you are really obsessed with the princess. The Crown Prince, who looked at the Marquis with strange look, slowly tilted his head. So did you keep the evil spirits out? Of course. Vinter, who answered with a sympathetic face, naturally turned to the Duke. So the testimony of maid that Lady Penelope ordered the poison to be brought to harm Lady Yvonne doesn't fit the actual situation. It is more like the exact opposite is true. Another person who had been silent until then opened his mouth. That commoner might have asked Becky to do something about it, or whatever, for her own safety. Reynold. The Duke looked back at his second son in astonished eyes, but before he could even say anything the young Duke quickly warned, "What kind of safety are you talking about here? Be careful of what you say." It's not clear yet that she had regained her memory, but what if she want to kill our adopted sister? Yvonne, as Derek's thick veins rose on his forehead at the sight of his younger brother, who was easily affected by sarcasm with bloodshot eyes. Yvonne was originally not supposed to attend Penelope's coming-of-age ceremony. For his little sister, who had been lost for 10 years by a mistake, they were sinful. How could he erase such cruel suspicions when he asked her for apology and forgiveness? The words "don't you feel sorry for her" filled his throat. It was all Derek could do not to say. How can a child who would not have stepped into the hall without me go to the coming-of-age ceremony and plan to poison Penelope? Isn't that the same thing with Princess? However, the answer that came back was not from Reynold but from the Crown Prince. Young Duke, so do you want to say that Princess predicted that you would bring your own sister? At last Derek's lips shut up at Callisto's mockery. For a while a heavy silence fell at drawing room. So we're divided into two groups with two opposite assumptions. After some time Vinter carefully organized the situation. Someone bribed the maid for Lady Penelope or Lady Yvonne, or the Duke heard the words that had become blurred without being able to speak out. Penelope must have played her own game. No one saw that she had deliberately changed her glasses just before they drank from these glasses. This naturally left the Duke's biological daughter out of the suspect. Tapping on the armrest with his fingernails quickly, the Crown Prince asked, who was lost in thought, "What's the reason of Princess doing such a self-made play?" "That's enough," Derek replied silently, who has always been in charge of the aftermath of her accident. "I'm ashamed to tell you, but Penelope would often demanded such attention in this way." "Do you agree with the young Duke?" The Duke and Reynold lowered their eyes down in shame at the question of Callisto, but failed to give another answer. Derek's words were no more no less true. Penelope would often draw attention in destructive ways. Although she seemed to have grown up recently, it was somewhat understandable from the perspective of her own self-play. The Crown Prince was on the battlefield around that time, and the Duke had stopped and prevented the spread of rumors inside the mansion, so the Marquis also couldn't understand the whole situation. However, a child's fault is the father's fall. I don't think Penelope would have done that far. The Duke opened his mouth with a heavy face. Reynold nodded quickly. "My father is right. She has something to do. Every week she is busy playing and eating because she gets paid." Penelope hated that Yvonne was back. Only Derek said something else, like a man who firmly believes that the end of this case is Penelope's own game. Servants said every time they bumped into each other. Yvonne came back crying. Reynolds laughed as if he was dumbfounded. Which one of us had the blinded eyes? She didn't say or do anything, but the commoner just cried. If you look at her words and deeds, in all intents and purposes are just like a knife to society. Unlike her beautiful appearance, it was true that Penelope's tongue was like a knife. Then Reynolds, who had been beaten by Derek's words, was speechless for a moment, and soon looked at his brother. So you are saying that she would have poisoned herself to divert attention from the commoner to herself? Don't jump to conclusion, it's just a guess that this might be the reason for her self-play. Stop, both of you. The Duke stopped the two of them in a fit of anger. It's not clear that Penelope was involved in a self-made play. But there's no reason to speculate now. Self-play, that's easy to say. Someone else intervened into the family quarrel. The Duke bowed his head to the Crown Prince with a very unpleasant expression. Your Highness, if the princess really did play her own play, doesn't that mean that she only planned it once in her life, for a day that draws everyone's attention? Isn't it strange? The reason she drank poison herself is that she just wants to get your attention. The faces of the Duke and his two sons hardened. Does the meaning of the prince's self-play mean that their attention was worth it, or was it a sign of such a thing because she didn't get one of the attention? The Duke opened his mouth for an answer, but the Crown Prince was ahead. Besides, it's because I listened quietly. The young Duke seems to have been anxious to blame the cause of this disturbance on the fault of the princess. The Crown Prince's gaze with the red eyes was shifted from the Duke to Derek. Have you been so frivolous about the princess every time? Not thinking of finding the exact cause, but deciding that it all was the fault of the princess, and finishing it quickly. Is that Eckhart's way of solving problems? Are you a great Duke who says I'm a Duke and you're nothing? Oh my God, it's disappointing. The face of the Duke and Derek were distorted by the mumbling of the Crown Prince, who became like a man speaking to himself. With a blush of the shame, the Duke answered back, holding back his anger. Your Highness, I beg you, but this issue is within the family. It has no regard to the imperial palace, but you shouldn't concern for our business. I promised to be engaged to the princess. Involved in the ducal family's business. When Callisto heard the Duke saying that it had nothing to do with him, and the Crown Prince snapped violently, the faces of the members of the ducal family became blank. Well, what do you mean? What did you just say? After the princess's coming-of-age ceremony, I was preparing to formally put a proposal to the family of the prospective crown princess. So if the princess dies like this, it won't be considered as a family affair anymore, Duke. Callisto looked back at each and every one of the people in the drawing room, revealing his intentions and laughing. But unlike the mouth which showed his smile, his reddish eyes were infested with mysterious, ominous sparkles. When the Crown Prince smiled with his fierce, cruel face, the atmosphere in the hall was intense, as if everyone was poured with cold water. Winter, who kept quiet in a bloody atmosphere, managed to make a voice. I don't think it's a self-play either. Knock, knock. It was then someone knocked on the door that had been closed all the time. Duke, this is Pennell. The butler's urgent voice broke the ice in the room. Come in. The Duke had allowed the butler to enter. Immediately after that, the butler came in with a click sound. I'm sorry to interrupt your conversation, but I have something to tell you urgently. The butler, who bowed his head and apologized, quickly announced the urgent news with a pale face. A maid named Becky, who had been locked up in underground prison, died. What? All the men's faces, including the Duke, were shocked. The maid has died, the butler notified with a dark face. Yes, she has died by biting her tongue in her mouth. What's it, Reynolds? The Duke looked back at his second son, who was in charge of the interrogation. Well, it can't be. She made this statement so faithfully that I didn't even have to use torture. And why? Reynolds muttered like an excuse with a face that the Duke didn't understand at all. The maid, who insisted that she only did what Penelope had told her, trembled at the very moment she was brought in. There was no falsehood in her face. However, self-examination was the custom of assassins who lost their mission. The atmosphere quickly became serious. There was a bizarre silence in the drawing room. First of all, investigate the actions of the dead maid. After quite a long time, the Crown Prince ordered in a heavy voice, where did she get the poison? What did she normally do in the Duke dorm? What she was doing before the coming-of-age ceremony, and how many contacts she had with the princess. It's too bad that she is dead, because I really wanted to find out if it was the princess's order. If this is case, then it is the way I used to use it on the battlefield. While shrugging his shoulders like a joke, Callisto was not smiling at all, still looking at him, who seemed to have focused on someone trying to kill the princess. Someone carefully added, "She is Yvonne's maid, then you'd better to include that bitch in this investigation." "Your Highness, you said she wasn't confirmed to be your own daughter yet." The Duke could not speak. It was true, but there was a law in everything. The Duke's face was stained with humiliation at the sight of the Crown Prince, who casually controlled the sensitive issues inside the family. Either way, the Crown Prince concluded at his own will. "Good for you. At this point you should check every detail of the commoner Duke. Doesn't the Marquis state that Penelope was poisoned and drank it herself?" Then someone asked back hard. Callisto turned his head. It was the young Duke, who was impatient to accuse the princess. "Oh yes." The Crown Prince nodded lightly, then turned his gaze from Derek and looked at the other. "By the way, Marquis of Verdandi, why do you think that the princess doesn't have a self-play?" The Crown Prince, who managed to remember what he was trying to say before the butler came in, asked. That Vinter couldn't answer immediately, and shook his lips. "It certainly wasn't her self-play if it included a dead maid. This is because she asked the poison from the office's head through her decent maid. Moreover, before she lifted the glass she looked at the necklace. Obviously she knew that the color of the necklace had changed to the primary color. Maybe she drank something different from the poison he gave her. Either way, he couldn't grasp the slightest hint of her intentions. In this state he couldn't figure out if it would be beneficial or not to tell the Crown Prince everything he knew. "Marquis," the Crown Prince tilted his head and called him as if he was in strange state without an answer. Vinter finally opened his mouth after biting his lips at the glare of the Crown Prince. "She already has a decent maid." A good excuse came out. Why would she let someone else do such a secret thing when she left her decent maid behind? Why would she do a thing like that? Why did she let the temporary maid of Lady Yvonne do it? "You've come to conclusion for a long time." "That's exactly what I'm saying." The Crown Prince again moved his red eyes to Derek. Derek refuted again. "But if it wasn't self-play, why was the antidote discovered, and why did Penelope drink wine when she knew it was poisoned?" "So let's do the investigation, young Duke," the Crown Prince said with a glance of his eyes. "Who is poisoning the princess, or is she really poisoning herself to get your attention? Or maybe the princess who noticed the self-written play planned by someone else, and she tried to stop it. Well, let's find out together." In his words, 3 pairs of blue eyes grew so large deep doubts were read in those eyes as if they had never thought about it at all. Callisto, who knew Penelope was a woman who was smart enough to make such a choice. It was understandable that the Duke family had regarded her as a stupid and immature baby. "Investigate all." Duke Callisto glared at all 3 of them in turn before I as a witness intervened directly as a member of Imperial family, not as a witness. Callisto left the Duke's parlor and moved quickly. He participated in the conversation to find out the circumstances of the princess poisoning, but it was a waste of time. In the meantime he was very busy worrying about what would happen to an unconscious woman. Almost running down the hall just as he was about to climb the middle stairs. "Your Highness," someone sitting in the middle hall woke up when he ran in. A hesitant Callisto turned slowly. What? The Crown Prince, who would have greeted his aides slyly at other times, stared at him with a hideous expressionless face. After a few days the Crown Prince's face was very rough. At times like this everyone should be careful of what he say and do. Cedric swallowed the dry saliva and managed to say, "His Majesty has asked me to bring back you, Your Highness." "Why?" "The Cronia's rebels have taken over the northern frontier." The Crown Prince, who burst into a smirk soon, turned roughly on the stairs. "Tell him to send the others there because I'm too busy right now. They're camped in the north, and they are gradually gaining power in collusion with the remnants of other defeated nations." Cedric cried in haste. His shouting face was also covered with frustration. "The day before yesterday Marquis Chase was taken over. The order is to go and suppress it right away." Marquis territory belonged to the north, where the barriers were solid and well trained by the soldiers. If that's the place, it was already got quite a few heads of rebels. "What the fuck?" The Crown Prince suddenly grabbed the Cedric and turned back to his aide again. His glare glistened with red light as he walked down the stairs. "Is there no commander in this country other than me? You could have made it into soup and fed it to them right up to their nose. Do I have to clean up every piece of shit? For nearly a decade I've rolled like a dog on the battlefield. But why should I play a fucking war game when I don't know when the woman I love is going to die?" His Majesty one-hit Cedric, who closed his eyes at the big hand that was about to hit him, shouted out in a burst. His Majesty said that after you completing this mission he will consider positively your engagement to the princess. He then opened his eyes and persuaded the Crown Prince with an earnest voice, without His Majesty's approval and support, engagement cannot be achieved. It was true, no matter how much he offered his proposal, it was no use if the Duke refused. Before that it was useless, as the princess hated it, but he was confident this time. Now he already knew what she wanted. Whatever it was, he had the power and the money to fulfill her wishes. Of course, only under the condition that the engagement would be done. His fist, which had been lifted high to beat Cedric, was eventually lowered and hit on the wall. Cedric trembled, imagining it might have been his own head. At the onset of his puberty, after being thrown into the battlefield as if he had been kicked out without knowing anything, he rolled like a dog and survived. As he returned to the capital with the message of his victory, he promised thousands of times that he would never play the Emperor's game all along again. He knew very well that if he accepted now, he would end up offering himself to put a jade leash on him again. But wait, he breathed slowly down his heated breath and said, as if he were brooding, "Tell His Majesty the situation is not urgent. Come on, you should say goodbye and don't come here anymore." Callisto, who shouted, swung up the stairs before Cedric could even catch him. He ran, fluttering with his red cape behind him, which was never caught by Cedric. Climbing up to the second floor, Callisto opened the princess's door to her room straight away. The dedicated maid, who has now become quite accustomed to his existence, hurried away without a hint of surprise. He walked across the room without hesitation. Before a long time, a large pair of shoes stopped near of her bed. The area around the bed was filled with smoke from the decoding candle burning up. Between the strong scent of herbs, the princess still closed her eyes as if she was dead. Her pale complexion, the smell of poison, her bright lips, and her dark pink hair, which had lost its light, gave her the appearance of a corpse. Other day, the Duke's adoptive daughter didn't even look like this when she tried to fake him, and was forced to dress up as if she was sick. A lively face and a ridiculous figure with a blackish painted eyelid. It was cute. A disgusting woman who even dressed up because she didn't want to meet him. However, Penelope Eckhart was even prettier. Penelope Eckhart. The Crown Prince reached out and touched the lips of a woman with his rough hand. It was already the third day since she collapsed from poison. She was able to save what it felt like. Blood was dry all day long. He could see the blood dripping for 3 whole days. He couldn't sleep for a few seconds. He was afraid she would die in the meantime. Fortunately, it stopped now, but he thought dozens and thousands of times whenever he saw her with her eyes closed, and her mouth was dripping with blood. Who dared to make her like this? The thought of it caused the boiling blood to rise in his head and his mind to heat up. The Crown Prince quietly murmured, looking down at the princess with his eyes full of unknown emotions, "Who poisoned you, or whether you drank it yourself with your own hands because you want to die? Now I don't care about that anymore. As long as I'm alive with my eyes wide open, you can't die. Wait for me, I'll come back and crush all the guys that made you suffer like this. I'll freeze their hearts by magic so that they don't die, and tear each limbs apart as much as the blood you shed, and put their foot in their mouths." The Crown Prince, who was shining with his red eyes and uttering an increasingly exuberant sound, suddenly stopped talking. When he said such cruel things, she would usually frown and hated them. "If you're going to do that, go to the place where I am not there." He thought she was going to get up at any moment, and gave him a hard time. However, the cold body without warmth did not even move. No, only then did the prince slowly stop himself from further cursing. "I didn't mean to say this." Getting down on his knees as if he were falling down by her bed, he stroked the face of the pale Penelope with his hands. "Just pretend you didn't hear anything just now, princess. I'm here to say goodbye. I'm in a hurry now. I'll be right back, so when I come back, please greet me with your open eyes." I wanted to see that. Ironically, Callisto, who muttered these rambling words, suddenly turned his face in desperation. He bowed his upper body. It was the goodbye kiss to his lover. Their lips were all touched. He pressed his lips against hers, which was as dry and pale as a sheet. He thought he wanted to give her his breath. "I'll do everything for you," and he whispered in a small voice. It was a secret no one should hear. "So let's fulfill her wishes. If you want to go out of here, I'll get you out of here. I will give you love or whatever you wish. I'll do everything you want. Don't die." Once again he swallowed with his dry lips, imploring desperately, and begging her to live. "Don't die, Penelope." The blue light pierced in front of me. I opened my eyes with a frown. I could see a familiar space at a glance. It was a vast underground space on Soleil Island, the base of the Layla clan. As I was surprised and looking around, I found a light source that pierced my eyes, white robes standing on the altar. No, it was the light coming from the ancient relics held by Yvonne. The light was pointing down. A child curled up in the air with nothing and a strange figure floating slightly below the floor. I realized right away I couldn't see, but I was under the blue light. I was saving Rayon, invisible by the magic that Winter casted over me. Winter lying in the corner of a spacious space, and Callisto lying on the floor to avoid the huge lizards. The moment I went through, the past was unfolded as if looking into a still image. And I watched it a step away like a third party. It was then suddenly the white robe, no, the blue light that was emitted from Yvonne's ancient artifacts shook. At the same time, something began to float over the mirror where there were nothing. It was a sight that I had never seen before. When I desperately closed my eyes, taking into consideration the words of Winter, who said, "Don't look at it," come to think of it, Yvonne saw me exactly, even though there was a magic of invisibility. From this objective perspective, the scene at that time was new. I glanced at the ancient relic Yvonne was holding. With my glazed eyes, the blue light became stronger. Soon a cloud of dust appeared in the mirror, which was shaking like waves on the water. As I was looking in the mirror, that became clear like a lie. I opened my eyes and took a sharp breath, looking into the mirror, which had become as clear as a bright day. I opened my eyes and breathed in sharp breaths. It was me, not me saving Rayon. Not Penelope with her beautiful appearance, but me, the real me. I was asleep in a corner, dead, holding my cell phone tightly in my hand, my appearance just before being possessed by the game. Why am I there? I stumbled towards the altar where Yvonne stood. One step, slowly, and the steps gradually accelerated. I reached the front of the mirror at one stroke. And the moment I reached my hand out to hold it before my fingertips touched the blue light emitted by the relics, the surrounding scene collapsed with a loud roar. No, what, in an instant the altar and cave walls disappeared and the black darkness filled the place. By the time I was panicking and looking around, a cloud of smoke lowered down by my side. I raised my head. Yvonne's only laptop-sized artifact had become an antique, massive, full-body mirror, and became dark. Above that, the sleeping reality I just peeped at was reflected with my room. A game screen with game over floating through the gap between the fingers holding the phone. Now I can go back. Now this thought occupied me instinctively. If I touch that mirror, I will be able to go back to my reality. I ran as fast as I could with my heart full of hope and joy and toward the giant mirror. If I rushed like this for some reason, it seemed like I could jump into my room over the mirror, and by the time I finally reached the huge mirror, I climbed the floor and jumped into the mirror as hard as I could. Even then I was full of unfounded belief that I could just pass through the mirror. However, I was badly beaten up by the cold, hard mirror at face. Oh hey, I'm dying. My bumped shoulder had been sore. No, it was just a strange bump. But my whole body began to ache, as if I had been beaten. What is it? Why? I looked up at the mirror in front of my eyes with tears in my eyes at that moment. White letters flashed over the mirror: system error, turning on, game over, couldn't be reached because you've entered the hidden route. I stared at it blankly and spat it out with a laugh. Don't fuck with me in this game. Game over meant the death of the character. It meant the death of Penelope's lives possessed by me, but when this crazy game chose death, it showed the system window with writing game over. I will be supposed to get out of here only when I'm dead. What the fuck? I went aside from my reflection and I ran to the mirror still shining before me and clenched my fists. You crazy game bastard, you let me in. Why are you not letting me go? Boom boom, I shouted, hitting on the mirror. I want to go back playing all night long. I felt more and more attached to the pitiful sight of me who was sleeping faintly. Let me go, system error, turning on, game over, couldn't be reached because you've entered the hidden route. Boom boom boom, but no matter how much I hit and shouted, only the white writing once again floated over my reflection in the mirror. And there was no change at that time. The mirror trembled as if the time had run out, my real self, and it began to blur as well. No, I shook my head wildly and beat the mirror like crazy person. I'm just going to die, so just let me go into reality. As my appearance in the mirror became disorganized and faded, the writing in the system window became clearer and clearer. System error, turning on, game over, couldn't be reached because you've entered the hidden route. At the sight of the window, which felt more awful than a nightmare, I was fed up and closed my eyes. What was your favorite part of the story so far? Whether it's a character moment, an epic battle, or a shocking twist, drop your thoughts in the comments. We're also excited to announce that Season 4 ends here, but don't worry, we'll be back with more once the manga's 5th season is released. We'll continue to bring you all the recaps, insights, and discussions you've loved. Stay tuned and thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share, and subscribe. Click the bell icon for notifications.